minute or so, we'll get this started. God bless you, Evangelist. Bless you, Cousin Ethel. All right. A few more seconds, we'll get started here.
$7.58.
I'll be moving fast. Bless you, Evangelist. Bless you, Evangelist. Tell that husband I said hello. Greg Walker's in. God bless you, Mark. Brother Mark Brown. How you doing, my brother? Love you too, brother. Got a good one for you tonight. We're winding it down. Feel the load getting lighter. Thursday will be our last broadcast. Not forever, but for a little while. Get with my production engineer. We'll figure out when we can come back and do some more things. All right, tonight we're going to be dealing with lost identity. Lost identity. How should I start this off? To know your identity is really to know your purpose. And when you find your purpose, you'll find your identity, because you'll start operating in your purpose. Have you ever said to yourself, I don't know who I am anymore? God bless you, Sister Dorothy. Have you ever gotten to that place where maybe you reacted to something or you behaved a certain way and you actually shocked yourself, and you said, I really don't know who I am anymore. And it happens to us from time to time. Even at a young age, I used to go to the clubs, parties, and I always remember thinking, man, you don't belong here. you do not belong here. God bless you, Pastor Carson. I figured out that I didn't belong there for a couple of reasons that was quite obvious. I was very shy. I was quiet. And another thing, I had no rhythm. Couldn't dance, It's kind of like, the movie The Jerk, when they was trying to teach him how to dance. That was me. God bless you, Uncle George. And my brother and sister, they like the Soul Train. Like Soul Train dancers. I mean, they had all the rhythm, but I just didn't have it. Was shy, no rhythm, and I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing here? When I watch TV and social media, it comes very clear to me. We don't really know who we are. We've lost our identity. One one time I lost. God bless you, Aunt Sandy. I think I lost my ID or card or something like that. And somebody said you need to take care of that. This was a while back, and I said I ain't worried about that. They said, well, somebody can take your identity. I said, well, when they look at my credit score, they'll give it right back to me. I said, they can't do nothing but help my credit. So I wasn't worried about somebody taking my identity. But when I look at, I was asking earlier, I remember watching a movie by Tyler Perry called Family Reunion, I believe it is. And you remember the patriarch of the family, the mother, you know, she finally comes out of the house and she's watching all her grandkids and all the family, and they're gambling and shaking it and fighting and all these other things, dressing certain ways. And you know, she was like, she had to have a speech at the end and remind them who they were and that this was not them. What we ask, what makes up our identity? Well, our values, our beliefs, our standards. What makes up our identity? Of how do we think? How do you think of yourself? Do you have low self-esteem? High self-esteem? Another thing that makes up our identity is how do you perceive others perceive you? You know, a lot of times we go through life and we put on this facade that we're perpetrating because we want other people to think we're someone who we're not. And so we go through life with an identity crisis. Some people's identity is based upon what they do. Well, I'm a doctor, you know, that's their identity. A lawyer, a pastor. You know, we gain our identity a lot of times by what we do, our profession. Or I'm a husband, I'm a wife. I noticed one thing as God bless you, Dad, when I'm going to talk about some things that makes us lose our identity as to who we are. And then I'll follow it up with how can we find our identity and our value system. One of the I remember talking to a couple who lost their child through a tragic death. And through that process, the mother, quite expectantly, had a hard time with it. Totally shut down, and she really became another person. And they end up going through a divorce. A loss, a tragic loss or loss of some type will sometimes trigger a loss of identity. And that's understandable sometimes. And some people are able to come out of it, and some people stay there in that shadow of the loss. And they really never, again, regain a sense of self and who they are. And the reason for that is their life was really intertwined with that child. And we'll kind of springboard off of that when couples raise children from birth up until 18. Their life had been so focused on the kids, taking them to soccer practice, basketball practice, baseball practice. And that couple really never had a chance to enjoy, first of all, each other or themselves. Everything was consumed into those children. And then what happens when that child goes off to college or flies the nest, you're stuck with two people who really don't have any identity, and really they don't know each other. Once again, a lot of times like that, they end up separating because their whole life was centered, their whole identity was centered on those children. And you should have some type of a balance with raising the kids, but we also should find that balance in maintaining that relationship with your spouse or your mate, and also maintaining a sense of self. In relationships, let's talk about that for a while. We can lose ourselves. God bless you, Cousin Fred. We can lose ourselves. God bless you, Brother Rodney. We can lose ourselves in relationships. We can get so intertwined with that person in that relationship that you tend to lose who you are. And then we talked about that a few classes ago, talking about codependency. There's a level of codependency that we can go into that we actually lose ourselves. It begins to, you start living for that person, and no longer do you live to enjoy yourself and what you like to do, but now it's all about that other person. And so how do we find that balance and still maintain a level of commitment, but yet maintaining yourself? You know, one thing I think that people do in relationships that can be sometimes detrimental when they totally lose their identity, they stop talking to their friends, stop talking to their family, and really they isolate themselves, they cut themselves off, and that's really not healthy. You should have, the Bible said, man shall cleave unto his wife, leave his family, cleave unto his wife, but there still should be some form of connection with that family, and not that connection that you over there every weekend, over there every day. There should be some type of boundaries, if you will. You can still check in on them, but when it gets to the point where it's affecting your relationship, then now you've kind of getting into an area where you're getting into that codependency stage that we talked about, having to be there. Now there's some times where if your parents are elderly, you got to check on them every day. Make sure they have what they need. But don't let your personal relationship suffer because of that. We're talking about healthy balances. In my personal marriage, I lost myself. I lost my identity because it's always pleasing that person. And we should do our best in relationship to please, to make sure that person has what they need. But to the extent that you lose all sense of self, that's what we're talking about today, losing your identity. What about you? What about what you enjoy doing? What about what you get enjoyment out of life of? Do you just give that all away just to make that relationship work? Now, the person that really loves you will say, oh yeah, I know you like to ride bikes, so go ahead and get your enjoyment there, and I'll see you later on today. Not so much make them lose themselves, because then that one person is going to be unhappy when there's that unequal balance, because somebody's going to get lost up in that relationship. What else? losing your identity. You can lose a job, and then you lose your identity. You know, that job was you, who you were. You know, you got your strength and your comfort out of that job, and then it's, you know, all of a sudden gone, and you're lost. And you're wondering, man, what am I going to do? That job was giving you your identity. What about, we talked about tragic events and the loss of, you know, what if you are taking care of a family member and for years and they pass away? You know, now it's that sense of, okay, that daily routine is no longer there anymore. So how do I come out of this, that mode of having to take care of someone, and now it's just me, now it's time to take care of yourself. Now it's time to go back and, maybe write a list. What do I enjoy doing? What do I love? What makes me happy? Write out a list. Now it's time to start living again. Rebuilding again. I took 7 years after my divorce to really focus on the me, on my identity. And it took that long for me to really understand who I was and form a good, solid sense of who Robert was. It's healthy to understand who you are and what you believe in. What is your moral values? And when you go into a relationship, now you're not scared to let them know who you are, and because that's your identity, and they have the option to take it or leave it. But when you have a real strong sense of identity, you won't settle for someone who won't accept you for who you are. And then when they accept you for who you are, then you don't have to change. You don't have to be a fake or phony. Those are the best relationships when, that person knows you and you know them, and they have a strong sense of self and you have a strong sense of self. I spent many years in the prison system, not as a prisoner. Don't y'all go starting rumors. But as a chaplain, as a evangelist. And I remember sitting down with a young man who was dealing with, I think he had 30-year sentence. I remember meeting him and sitting down and talking with him. I asked him what his name was. And instead of giving me his name, he gave me a number, like a 6 or 7 digit number. That's his identity. And it really blew me away, because when one goes into the system, they really don't really refer to the names as much as they do to their number. They have to memorize that number. Every day they have to say it. They line up. What is your number? Then you tell them the number. You're no longer a person anymore. And it's unfortunate in our system that we take young men. Most of the time when I was in the prison ministry, most of my young men that came to our services was between 18 to 27. Stripped from a sense of self, identity. And then we release them and expect them to be outstanding model citizens. And they don't even know who they are. That's a sad situation. Even in the military, my brother spent 20 plus years in the service. God bless you, Brother Greg. And the first thing that they do when you go into military is break you down, strip you of your what you think your pride is, who you are, because they want to mold you into a soldier and basically take your identity from you. My brother tells a story. You know, we came up in a house where there was discipline, and I thank God for every whooping, every scolding that I had, every hard working day that we had to get up and work. I thank God for that. I would not trade my upbringing for nothing, because it gave me a sense of identity. I watched my dad get up and he put on a shirt and tie, briefcase, and he go to work. When he come home from work, he take those clothes off, put on his antique clothes, and we go antiquing. And some days he come off work and take the shirt and tie off and put on his farming clothes. So I gained a sense of identity of what we should be as men. So that's how I took on my identity. But my brother, get back to the story. My brother said when he went to the service, God bless you, Brother Mark. God bless you, Evangelist Jackson. My brother said he went to the service. I guess he got off the bus and that drill sergeant got right up in his face and ripped him from one ear to the other. And my brother said, kind of smirked and said, well, you ain't harder than my daddy. He went to the military with identity, with fortitude. You know, Luke tells a story of James and John. You know, it's important that even as we as children of God, we should have an identity. We should, you know, these 40 shades of deliverance was to give us an identity. Help us know who we are, who we should be, what we should strive to be. Well, in that book of Luke, chapter 9, James and John went to a town, I think it was the Samaritans, and I guess to kind of prepare them for Jesus was coming, and they didn't receive him. And so they asked Jesus, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and burn them? And you know what Jesus said? You don't know what manner of spirit you are of. Here's Jesus' disciples asking him, do you want us to burn these people up just because they don't want to receive you? Jesus basically said, you don't know your identity. I can see Jesus said, have you learned anything since you've been around me? You got to know who you are. And one of the greatest illustrations of that was when Jesus was with the disciples. And he asked them a very important question. And he shows us the importance of the fact that we can't let others create our identity. He asked the disciples, who do men say that I am? I think they said, some said John the Baptist, the prophet, or, you know, and Jesus had a sense of self-identity. Then he turns around and said, but who do you say that I am? You know, when you know who you are, you don't care who says what or this or that about you, because you know who you are. Now, if you get mad because someone says something about you or who they think you are, that means you have an identity issues. You don't know who you are. So Jesus said, well, who do you say that I am? Peter said, "Thou art Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus said, "You got that right. Blessed art thou." Jesus knew exactly who he was. And he confirmed Peter's. He said, "Man, you know what? You got that straight from heaven. Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. My Father gave you that revelation, brother. And you were right on the money." So don't let nobody, no one, distort your identity because of who they think that you are. I get kind of tickled sometimes when people try to figure me out. I don't try to correct them. I just walk in the light. Walk in the light. And it's, we come under attack daily. But that's why the Bible said we got to crucify this flesh daily, because if you don't, when somebody say who they think you are and you not, that flesh arise. You got to crucify that flesh. Christ wants to give us a new identity. I was talking about some time ago a young man that grew up with a father that was barely in his life, mother that was, halfway there, and that has been a crutch for him for many and many and many of years. I often get sad when I hear the conversation coming from him. And I always think about the fact that Christ said, "Don't call no man on earth your father." Because you got one Father, which is in heaven. So we always kind of talking about our earthly father, but you got a Father in heaven that if you're looking for a new identity, stop using the excuses of your childhood. Daddy wasn't here, Mama wasn't there. Well, you got a Father up there that wants to give you a new identity. That's why he said in Matthew 16, "Whosoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whosoever loses his life for my sake will find it." I love Paul's statement in Galatians 2:20. He proclaims his self-identity not of himself, but of God. He says, "I am crucified with Christ, but nevertheless I live." Now, how can you be crucified with Christ and dead, but yet live? I always kind of question that verse. I'm crucified with Christ, but nevertheless I live. He says, "Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." So Paul has wrapped his identity in the death and the resurrection of Christ. Now that's an identity right there. One that we can hold on to. John 15 says, the Lord said, "If you abide in me, and my word abides in you." He's talking about his identity being inside of you, his word being inside of you. And I always quote the scripture, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." Do you know who you are? That's the question. Jesus said, "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. That's an identity. Wow. Let me give you one of my favorite quotes from the apostle. In Acts 17, he says, "For in him we live, in him we move, in him we have our being." My friends, my time is up. It's up. I'm sorry. God bless you, Evangelist Dunson and Lisa Bird. God bless you.